next one too. Beware your human heart. This is Diabolical Index for June 3rd, 2019, where the pages of the uncanny reside. As always, I'm Corey Dawson, coming from Moreland Manor, I think I called it. The new home after the much missed and respected loss of the Nut House. But hey, we're doing good here. I got this cool bookcase behind me, giving me a little bit of legitimacy where once there was none. But hey, I hopefully I'm all there tonight. It's been a little bit of a harrowing day. But speaking of harrowing days, June 26th, 8 p.m. at the Kettletop Brew House in was that Anderson, Indiana? Anderson, Indiana. Check out the Kettletop Brew House. I will be getting together with some of the fellows from Pointless Discussions, Juice in the Morning, and I thought there was someone else. Maybe it's just us. Pointless Discussions, Juice in the Morning, and the Diabolical Index will be coming to whoever shows up to the Kettletop Brew House in Anderson live with a strange mixture of improv comedy, choose your own adventure. There will be prompts. I'm sure that the audience will be picking which way we go, kind of akin to what we do here on the non-entries on Mondays occasionally, where people make the decisions for us. So that should be interesting. I'd be really surprised if anything like that had happened at that place before, but you never know. I'm not sure. Did you get that up there, man? Okay, cool. Yeah, as you can see, Justin from Oh Yeah Dig It podcast made a really awesome representation of a Choose Your Own Adventure, old school Choose Your Own Adventure cover for the poster. Hopefully I'll be getting one of those posters soon. But I have to say, I can definitely tell it's me. The look on my face, there's a smugness to it. There's a little bit of an otherworldliness to it. But it's unmistakably me, though. And it's great because I'm wearing a button-up shirt. I look a little bit more dapper than I normally do. My guess is I've got a few photographs up of Mel and Lucy and I at a wedding reception. So I'm betting that's probably where the reference came from on that. But it looks really interesting, and I love it that Nebuchadnezzar, or whatever the name of the squirrel with the warlock's cap on, is in the center there, and it looks awesome. So I guess that I'm considered the host of this stuff, but I'm sure I'll be getting on the hijinks in more ways than one, and imbibing of the milk of human kindness and probably the pig swill of the well drinks. So we'll see. I'm not sure. I've never been to that place before, but apparently Juice is real good in with those people. So we'll see what happens. It would be awesome if someone made a huge mistake and thought we were celebrities. That would be pretty cool. But anyway, June 26th, it's a Wednesday, 8 p.m. at the Kettletop Brew House, Anderson, Indiana. Be sure to check that out. Okay, so tonight, basically, I was going over the book that I had started reading a book a few weeks ago, and it's called, you got book cam? It's called Little Heaven. Are you listening? No. Okay. Little Heaven by Nick Cutter. There are a few people that are pretty pumped that I was doing another Nick Cutter novel after The Troop, and I'd have to say I was not disappointed. There are a lot of things that can be said about this book, and I kind of combed a lot of reviewers, a lot of analysts when it came to Nick Cutter's work. It seemed like they harkened back to The Troop, and I think his other one, I want to call it The Deep, but there's a Peter Benchley novel by that name as well. But his book is about the Mariana Trench or something, and I haven't read that one. But they kind of describe Little Heaven as a growth, like an evolution of his writing from those two books, but mostly in the in the realm of gross out horror, things like that. And he hasn't lost that in this book as much as it's been refined. There isn't a whole lot of blatant gross outs in the book, but it doesn't fail to sink into the gruesome from time to time. But in this book, and what kind of inspired me to do the topic tonight was I had read a few articles a couple of years ago about how there has been a probably in the last 30 years or so, there has been this tendency to discount action, like scenes of action in horror, scenes of detection, scenes of kind of not necessarily like the mob with torches, but more like people going after the supernatural, almost to be fought, like it's a battle, like as if humans stood a chance against the supernatural. And in the 70s, I think is kind of when that kind of came to a head and rolled back when it comes to the prevalence of it. It definitely hasn't stopped. Action in horror is kind of what this made me think of, due to the kind of like the framework of the way it's set up. They're kind of well, I'll just get right to it. Basically, the book. I almost said the movie. I can see why that would happen because the book is very cinematic. I could see this, and I may have mentioned it before in an episode. I wasn't talking about the book for the episode, but it may have come up because in this book, definitely you could almost take it directly off the page and put it into a cinematic. I mean, you could call it is like a tapestry because, and this has been kind of point of contention for a lot of reviewers. They've said that there are a lot of things weaved in and out of the book, and every book, every movie, television show that's kind of occurred in the 21st century. There's such a rise of nostalgia, and I guess adults being much more comfortable looking back to their childhoods, to what they liked then, the kind of television shows, cartoons, different comics, and different things that they've gotten into in their youth. There's much more of an understanding about keeping that well into your adulthood, and in some cases, it's kind of become a subject of scrutiny when it comes to like toxic fan bases and whatnot, not wanting to ruin our childhoods and stuff. I'm gonna take a look over here. Let's see. Got the Wikipedia up there. Everybody's getting their they're getting their rations ready for I guess when the drinking begins. I'm not sure, but there's been a little bit of a habit with checking for keywords and phrases to tip that bottle back. But let's see here. Josh the Forge, thanks for stopping by, man. I will be looking forward to getting with you about that project we talked about. Mysterious. Yeah, Josh the Forge from Running Scare Motion Pictures and we've been talking about maybe working on something together pretty soon. So, thanks, Josh. Anyway, sorry, my allergies are acting up. But not to get too far off topic. Basically, with Little Heaven, it reminds me so much of a lot of the 90s, basically horror with, I guess you could say horror with human enemy, or horror with the search, a human on the search of horror in the everyday world and things like that. Little Heaven begins with kind of a more recent look at the three protagonists, Micah, Ebenezer, and Minerva. There are great names throughout, and I'm going to get to that as we go along. But basically, what we're seeing here is three broken down, flawed, stained, changed characters you see them kind of at their worst, or in some cases, kind of like their um, kind of like the receding years, like the eroding years of their skill, which is to say, they're all assassins. All three of them have made money from killing people for one reason or another, mostly without any sort of emotional investment or vengeful attitude, things like that. They've done it for the money and without a whole lot of moral compunction, but they have paid the price. And at this point, we don't know how they've paid the price. Mr. Goley, thanks for stopping by. Yeah, definitely. I'll have. Yeah, he's talking about kind of like the Western and personal meaning of the name to him, and how it goes into kind of like the Western motif and stuff when it comes to Micah, the name Micah. For, I mean, I guess you could say that Micah is kind of like the heart of the group, I guess you'd say. Um, Although there's very little heart when it comes to dealing death between these three. But like I said, it begins in 1980. It shifts from 1980 to 1965 and back again a few times. But this is the aftermath, 15 years later from a turning point and a moment of truth in their lives. And for whatever reason, in Micah's case, he has started a family, and it's kind of argued in the story that maybe it was a little bit too late, and kind of like the older reclusive millionaire in the Philip Marlowe story. He kind of says that any paraphrasing, but any problems that arise from having children so late in life, he says are all his fault. But um, basically, this is a story of something returning to settle the score. And in this case, it falls on Micah's daughter, Pet, who is lured from his home into the weeds and then further into the forest, which is where the dark things go. So in her case, she comes face to face with um, something that her father knows all too well. And it's something that no one could possibly describe, but Nick Cutter does a pretty damn good job at it. And the prologue, I hesitate to mention the prologue. It doesn't mention any characters that we get to know, but it does mention kind of like the way that the darkness operates in the story. And I'd have to say it took me by the neck right away and didn't let go. So we see that Micah's daughter becomes ensnared in the demons of his past, and he's left with a victory, but it's a bitter victory in that his daughter is nowhere to be found after the meeting, and he does kind of come upon what could be responsible, and the meeting is something that he's known was going to happen for a while, so it's not so unexpected that he's not ready. He goes into the barn to find the implements of his past life pretty easily. So let's see what the words are tonight. Prologue, darkness, drink. Let's see. Okay, so oh boy. There we go. There are all kinds of buzzwords tonight. Anyhow, the second protagonist, I guess you'd say, there are terms for all these things. When there are multiple protagonists, there are different terms for them. They're pretty cool. I don't know all of them. Hopefully one of these days I will, but I love learning. In fact, I learn every day. I walked in here tonight and I found out about a guy who does puzzles on the internet. Almost like an unboxing, but he he talks about puzzles and cards. I guess he's a magician of sorts too, so you're always learning stuff. Anyhow, um, the second character of note is Minerva, who we find in a bar, which is, according to her own statements, that's kind of where she normally ends up. It's to forget, and it keeps mentioning something that they'd all rather forget, and it shows them at the kind of in the gutters of their lives due to something that would have happened. But we don't know all that stuff yet. And normally, I'm not gigantic. I'm not a gigantic fan of constant flash forwarding, flashbacks. But in this case, it's really super finely tuned. I really enjoyed it a lot, and to me, it didn't stumble. It was really super smooth. So in this case, we see her kind of wondering how she should go about her life and dealing with society when she could just as easily, snuff them all out like candle wicks. But she can't or doesn't and has, but sooner or later, something that wears a badge or draws a gun will at least put her in an inconvenience, because there is an inkling that she brought something back from this time and this conflict that may not give her the peace of death. She talks about, maybe not wanting that last resurrection. It's super mysterious, and it's kind of vague, but nowhere near so vague as to not catch your attention. And so she goes through her normal routine, and she ends up crossing crossing paths with others in that line of work that she still does from time to time, and it kind of becomes almost like a challenge. You come across this old dog, and somehow they still manage to find new tricks when it comes to death. So that's where we're kind of touching on all of these people, showing what has come after what they thought was the final conflict, and not, never so much as with Ebenezer, who is used to be known as the Whispering Death, but he's now known as Gardner, I believe. He doesn't go by his real name in a small town. He just does odd jobs and hides in plain sight as a British-speaking black man in the 80s, underestimated by the town. And no one could guess where he had come from and what he had done, especially as we're to find out in 1965, where all three of these characters find themselves in a stable, and some have been brought there by money, some have been brought by contract, by obligation to the craft, to the employer, and some are there for all kinds of reasons, including all of those, and not without a pinch of revenge. So Micah, who tends to be kind of like not necessarily the conscience. The conscience isn't the best word for it, but I guess kind of like the head scout in later times. He happens upon these people, and it turns out that one is there to kill the other, and one is there to kill one, and the other, and it just ends up being this triangular gunfight. And Micah had worked for a drug dealer, and it was another one of those things where he didn't quite see it so far as to leave until he saw kind of like the result of drugs on a pregnant mother. The mother had brought her child with her to get more drugs from, I think his name's Seabury. And as soon as Micah sees that, he's on the way out. So then he's marked, and they're all marked in one way or another. And basically, they all get gunned down in one way or another and end up in the hospital together. And it's one of those weird contradictions in the criminal justice system, at least in like books and movies. I don't know how true this really is, but it seems like in most of these things, they want you well and able to stand on your own 2 feet before they kill you. So in this case, you got a hospital ward full of killers. So they're all just kind of like on the mend, and throughout this battle, Micah has lost an eye, so he ends up being that eye patched, squint-eyed loner who ends up. It's one of those stories that often happens where you have three loners, traveling together. So they basically all realize that the only way out of this thing, seeing as how they're all, cooped up in this hospital, and they're wounded for better or worse, and they realize that they could go to like federal prison. Some of them could go to the chair or to the gas chamber or what have you. So they decide to get out of there. Yeah. Mr. Golan knows what's up. So they decide to make their escape, helping each other. And it's one of those wonderful things where you see these truly heinous characters that you don't necessarily like for what they are, but you see how they interact with each other, and they just become really charming and interesting and exciting and curious characters. So I can't, every time I think about the book, I can't help but think how awesome it would be to see a bunch of these as scenes in a film, or to see it in comic book form. In fact, there's some really great illustrations. I'm not quite sure who does the illustrations in here. There aren't tons of them, but the ones that do exist. Let me see here. I gotta find one. It makes me think of a comic. How great it would be if there was a comic here. So like, let's see. Did that come out all right? That way? Okay. The Hired Gun. I believe that's Minerva right there. So, this scene is just so clear in my mind of the three bleeding assassins who are in hospital smocks, or in some cases they've made bandages out of sheets, bleeding, riding horses they've stolen into the dust. And it's been referred to. Am I straight up or to the side now?
You're over here.
Here? Okay.
Not this one, the other one.
Okay. He points at both of them normally, and I don't know which one he's talking about. But anyway, they refer to it as a horror western, and I can see that. I can definitely see how you would get kind of the flavor of the western from it, because they're all three gunslingers, and they're hard bitten, hard scrabble down their luck, and it mostly takes place in New Mexico and around those areas. So I can definitely see that. I think that calling it a western is tonal. I think that the tenor of it is definitely a western type. You have revenge. You have someone who basically, okay, so we'll get to that. I don't want to spoil too much of it. I've told you a lot already, but one thing that definitely shows up in this, and has been, a lot of reviewers have complained, which is really interesting to me. I'm not exactly sure what they want out of a book, but they basically said that the characters, damn those characters, they're so three-dimensional that, I don't know, it takes away from the story. It's like, what are you talking about? But anyhow, I guess it comes down to if someone is reviewing a horror book, maybe that's all they want out of it, is just a sheer horror of everything. When I would venture to say that most of the most potent horror that I can think of has everything to do with the relatability and the recognizability of the characters. So it's really strange that that they would go in that direction, but it is absolutely true. The characters are incredibly well flushed out, um, which is really strange. Also, yeah, absolutely. Mr. Gully's talking about Billy Kid versus Dracula, um, but yeah, I'm there are definitely a lot of movies that I want to touch on too. I try to do it at a minimum, but with this, the horror western has definitely existed for a long time, back even to like Robert E. Howard days and stuff like that. Before that, the pulps. But um, when it comes to this, I think the most important part is the interaction between these three characters and what happens when, in kind of a serendipitous thing, they end up hanging together for a while just due to circumstance, trying to make money here or there or whatever, and they figure they can do it better as a team, especially since most of them are still healing from their wounds and whatnot. But they get contact, or they actually get almost ambushed by Ellen, and she's I think she might be a clerk somewhere. I can't remember off the top of my head. There are actually a lot of characters that get some pretty decent backstory. So forgive me about Ellen, but basically, I think her name's like Clearwater. That's another thing with the names. The names, I said I wanted to get back to it. The names are definitely Bellhaven, Ellen Bellhaven. So there are these incredibly, I don't want to say complex names, but you're not dealing with John Smiths. Everybody's name is really illustrious sounding. And in a lot of ways, no, I'm not wearing pants, if that's your question. If we want to be specific about things, no, I'm not wearing pants. But I mean, it's one of those. It's a freeing thing when you're sitting at a table and no one would ever see. Uh, why not? You know. I've seen Commando, but anyways, back on topic. Ellen hires this raggedy trio to help her find her nephew, who has been kind of sucked into the clutches of this religious utopia called Little Heaven. And Little Heaven itself, that also kind of brings to mind the Western, because you have this kind of like village or collection of souls on the outskirts who are trying to find a utopia in this horrifically modern and sinful land. So they make it out there by what used to be called Devil's Rock, which is this monolithic black rock near this forest. And he makes his church. And by he, I mean the Reverend Amos Flesher. So there's no doubt as to who. The whole place is full of villains, but in this case, Amos Flesher is your villain, and it's totally difficult to say Flesher rather than Fletcher. But that's okay. In this case, he deals in the flesh, and on the way to Little Heaven, our heroes. I don't want to say anti-heroes. They're definitely heroes. In fact, what they remind me of are errant knights. They remind me of people who have had to do horrific things, but in the end, they end up serving a greater good, even maybe unbeknownst to them. So they make their way slowly to Little Heaven to find her nephew. And along the way, they end up running into the most horrific vanguards of what kind of walks behind the religious sect that lives back there. Anyhow, in this case, it's just wonderful. It's wonderful when you get to the things that stand in their way, the things that kind of pluck at their tents in the middle of the night and look out from behind the trees, and there are things that they can't be sure are real. In some cases, Ebb hurts his ankle really badly, so he's half delirious from the pain, and so he doesn't quite believe what's real. And it reminds me a lot, and this kind of goes into the action and horror. This whole The Little Heaven reminded me of a lot of books where action is a part of the story, but in the end, everything's surrounded by this level of horror and terror and a lot of creepy crawlies, things like that. I'm not so sure I want to go much farther than this in explaining what's going on, but they are making their way towards the moment of truth, and what they find in Little Heaven that ends up dogging their footsteps 15 years later, and wants a reckoning. Mark Reynolds, what's up, dude? I'm glad you make it out, man. He's really pumped about the Creeping Coffin next week, which is cool. Unfortunately, we don't have the peanut butter Goosebumps, do we? The Goosebumps Choose Your Adventure? Something about peanut butter. I can't remember what. But the villain is incredibly villainous. I think that's one thing that kind of... This book is fun. And it's creepy. And it's recognizable. There's nothing in it that makes you think, oh, this is so far-fetched that I can't even imagine. Except, hopefully, you never come across some of the denizens of the forest. Which actually reminded me a lot of the Gunslinger, which comes back around to... that's not on there.
I didn't know you were actually doing that. You're going like that. I thought you were
I'm not.
separately and shit.
Yeah, he's like, oh shit, I gotta bring stuff up. No,
when he said Dracula earlier, I was like, well, I fucked that up.
No, it's okay. It's okay. No, I'll just do him in series. Basically, I'm talking to Andrew. I've got a lot of visual aids to come up with the action and horror stuff, but this is one of those instances where if someone's looking for a subtle villain, you're not going to find it here. This is definitely one of those villains that are beyond any sort of humanity, and it makes me think of a lot of stories of horror where you can easily put religious zealots and horror together. I mean, it kind of it resonates and it echoes the Jim Joneses and David Koresh and things like that, where it seems like where these nexus points happen, where people like kind of found their churches. I don't know if there's some sort of ley line that runs through there that could also pierce the veil of darkness, things like that. Or maybe it has to do with these utter... I don't want to necessarily say sheep. I don't want to get political with it, but it seems like when you have these minions, it could so much more easily become a minion of evil. Because there's a fine line, especially when you come to the otherworldly. If you're in a place where you need two people to know that a god is there, I mean, it could easily be something else at the same time. Especially since when you look at Flesher, he's horrible. There's no redeeming qualities to this guy whatsoever, which I think a lot of critics would pan as being lazy, especially in the 21st century. You got to have your sympathetic villains. And I love me some sympathetic villains, but I also long for the time of really horrific villains too. So I was not disappointed with Amos Fletcher. Uh, he is horrible. At one point, like I said, I don't want to give too much, but just as an example, and this is yet another flashback, but it doesn't change year. It's just like within the narrative that he talks about finding out about what it means to control people when he was in an orphanage, and he was put in charge of what they called God's children, which is to say, in this case, the megacephalics and people with different um, genetic abnormalities, things like that. And he found out what it was like to stick him with pins just for the fun of it, you know. And it's horrific, which counts because you have this person who wants to bring enlightenment to these people, but it turns out real quickly that what he has in mind for them isn't anywhere near what it means to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. It's much, much, much darker than that. So what we have in this is um, three people who had done evil, usually at the bidding of others, payment of others, who find themselves in a place where they have to defend themselves and defend others against this terrible, powerful thing. And it comes back. And there are turning points, and there are victories, and there are defeats, and sometimes even in their own memory. Um, when Micah finds Ebenezer after everything had gone on, and a decade later, he's a shell of what he used to be. And in a lot of ways, they all have uh, varying levels of leaving what they were behind, whether it's leaving the body, leaving their skill, just becoming a husk, or in Micah's case, starting anew and becoming a different man in having a family. And so the jumping back and forth, there are, it's considered like parts where they show you the difference. And to me, I didn't find it clunky at all. I ended up having a really great time with it, and I found that the kind of callbacks to the greatest hits of horror, the greatest hits of different books, movies, television shows, all that kind of stuff. I found that it was so ingrained in the DNA of the story that it didn't really hit me over the head at all. In fact, after I had seen some of the reviews and stuff, I went around looking for it, and I didn't think that it did it any more noticeably than anything else does. I think that sometimes this push for nostalgia and this hatred of nostalgia and all this kind of thing where people say that, we're just all the references, the Easter eggs, the callbacks to different things. I think that they see it as never having happened in the history of anything. And the truth is that it happens all the time because you have that love of trope, and in some ways, cliche. Even some people are looking around for the comfortable notes and reverberations and mirrorings of stuff that they had seen in the past, as long as it's not so overt and so obvious that you end up having to. I watched this massive critique. I totally recommend Mauler, Mauler. I recommend Mauler if you want a thorough critique of the Star Wars movies. I recommend that guy. I think that it's something like 15 hours worth. a lot of people would see that daunting and unnecessary. I find it fantastic. But in his case, um, it's basically a question of whether or not your enjoyment of the film hinges on those things or is enhanced by it. If it ends up being an ingredient of the whole mess, or if it ends up being a condiment. So to me, I didn't see this stuff at all. And if anything, it's in this grand tradition of the horror western. And I'm going to leave Little Heaven there, just so there are a lot of things that are best left unexplained about the book, because when you come across it, it definitely Nick Cutter. If they are saying that this is an evolution of his work, I would definitely say that it's very, very smooth. It isn't as if it's this massive trumpeting, thundering change in what he does. If in fact, I really liked the Troop, but I do think that there are a lot of things that are weaved in here a little bit more deftly than before. So I can definitely say that with Little Heaven, it was a total blast. And there are things to be lost, and there are things to be won by these characters. And the whole book reminded me, we'd actually watched The Mummy Returns, The Mummy and The Mummy Returns the other day, and it Troop came out first. Emily, as far as I know, I think that the Troop came out before Little Heaven. But when we were watching that movie, all I could think of is, it seems like most of the heroes taking on the horror, it seems like that's really based in horror books from the 1800s, and it took shape again in the 70s, but usually on a more personal level, and then in the 90s it really kicked into gear, but almost at the end of the horror life on the shelves in grocery stores and whatnot. Which is a shame, because I remember that really intensely. I remember going to the grocery store and seeing Brian Lumley's Necroscope. It seems like I saw that everywhere. And a friend of mine who actually he became a pretty great writer, and I did his book as my first entry. I remember him turning me on to Robert McCammon. We were in home ec class, and he had Stinger, Robert McCammon book, and you see this reptilian hand like coming out of this desert wasteland, and it seemed like McCammon was really big on for that too. But I have to say, there seems to be a long tradition of this. As I was looking up stuff for this, a lot of things came to me, and a lot of things became real clear and resonated with that. And now, for whatever reason, I would say that the greatest examples end up showing up in movies and television. But it's as simple as looking back to, some of the most famous stories that have ever existed. And the greatest heroes and some of the greatest villains too. When it comes to, especially, and I hadn't thought about this before, and then it came to me like, who's one of the greatest heroes of all time, and what did he go after? And it turns out that it was a monster, and it wasn't in a sort of mythological way. There were definitely him and his band were definitely set upon, and they had to go out and kill it before it killed them. And it wasn't an enemy of normal human weapon. It was a creature, and in that we find just the absolute basis of horror. So when I thought of Beowulf, it brought Grendel to mind, and I saw the Beowulf film, and that always seemed to me like I don't know, a real downplayed, and maybe it was a meta type of thing where they were trying to to make it seem like it could have happened now rather than being something of the fantastical. And that's kind of a not necessarily a problem, but I think that it comes up a lot for whatever reason. I was noticing that when you're talking of this idea of the horror western, um, when you say when you involve the western in it, there's no question. It almost always ends up being considered horror. But when you delve into something that might include crime or detection or I guess kind of the gumshoe type of approach towards things, it ends up being called fantasy. So I don't know exactly how that shakes out. If I really don't know. I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on this when it comes to the horror western? I mean, as far as I can tell, I don't think anyone ever. I mean, later on, I'd say the Gunslinger series delved more into fantasy, but I would say that the first Gunslinger at least was massively horror based. Um, and fantasy comes when you start throwing everything in the kitchen sink in there. I think that's when that normally happens. But um, just as simple as one of the absolute most popular ever done. When you think of Dracula, at the basis of that book, you have these, I guess you'd say, kind of Avengers that go out to try to hunt the demon, if you call him the demon, um, the seducer of women and maker of minions who steal children for food and all that kind of stuff, unkillable, undying creatures. Um, the cowboy and the dandy and the doctor. I mean, when you think of this group, this trio of Avengers going out to find the Count and his brides in the castle, that sounds like Knights again. But there's no question of it being a horror book. So, um, badassery has existed almost since the very beginning, if you think about it. And there are definite explanations of action in those. You can't have a cowboy involved in a in a vampire hunt without a little bit of action involved. So, Pointless Redemption is a horror western comedy. Does that count? Sure. And yeah, there's so many. As soon as I started going through this, all I could think of was, oh my god, it seems like it's translated to movies so easily. Um, and speaking of movies, one of the books that I was thinking of was a movie, and I ended up it was cool because I ended up being familiar with the books before I was the movie, and all this stuff came out in way before I was born, and so it's neat when you can kind of discover something before it's spoiled by a film adaptation. But The Devil Rides Out by Dennis Wheatley. Dennis Wheatley ended up doing a whole crop of supernatural. I don't know. I guess you'd call it like supernatural leisure gothics or something like that, where it definitely has to do with normal life, but not necessarily the lower class. It kind of had like an upper class sensibility about it, and a pulpy feel. But that ends up having to do with a lord. I can't remember his name off the top of my head though. But Christopher Lee plays him in the film, and I totally recommend the film The Devil Rides Out for anybody. It rocked, and it definitely had that kind of villain on the run quality that the Mummy had too, where you have this established villain and does all kinds of nefarious deeds, usually kind of with a flavor of corruption and taking people from their normal lives and showing them that evil does exist, and it can corrupt you towards horrific things to gain power, all that stuff. So yeah, it ended up cropping up everywhere I looked. I mean, um, one of my big favorites was Solomon Kane, Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane, which is like this Puritan. Um, I don't know if you'd call him a warrior. Like I mean, he went around to different villages, and it's kind of that whole thing about like finding the horror in um, pre-colonial America, something like that. Um, oh, Angela, yeah, you doing a Wheatley for the Black Books. Check out Black Books Club, aka the Mask of the Red Book Club. Yeah, you definitely need to do a Wheatley. There are so many to choose from. But Solomon Kane was this fantastically unique character of the staunchly religious Avenger, and he has a real. It's one of those Old Testament type of. Um, he's got a real Old Testament feel to him, where he will cut sin out. So it's fantastic, and the movie ended up being a lot better than I expected, and I waited for a long time. But uh, seeking out demons in their burrows in that type of lands, and I guess you could. I don't know. I guess you might be able to put Silver John in there. Um, hmm. Man, Manly Wade Wellman. It's hard to say. That might be a genre unto itself. But when it comes to the kind of as you go along, it kind of goes more towards almost like the action hero as horror slayer type of thing. And the first one that comes to mind always for me is The Tomb from F. Paul Wilson. Repairman Jack is the ultimate in this line of thinking. Um, for as much as he ends up, that's in there too, Andrew.
I know.
Um,
I didn't know.
we're on a little bit of a lag, but um, whenever I think of horror, action and horror as an action film, I always think of The Tomb because it had the most. Like, in fact, the cover that I gave to him is probably one of the most lurid covers for that I've ever seen, and I've never had one with this cover, but I liked it, so I picked it. Um, but it's so strange what's happened with the Repairman Jack marketing of the character. In the very beginning, when The Tomb came out, it was one of those things. And Robert McCammon, that happened to him too. I don't think it happened so much with Stephen King, except for the typeface. It seems like the Stephen King typeface was all over everything, but the covers were pretty individualized. But with The Tomb, it came out with this strange green and yellow cover, and it was kind of subdued, and people didn't know quite what to think of it. And then you have a cover like this that shows this altar and maybe the promise of a human sacrifice and stuff. And it's really interesting the way it turns out because Repairman Jack is just I wouldn't call him a normal guy, but he is definitely just a guy who has, certain skills, and he's off the grid. It's basically a character that wouldn't find its footing for years and years and years. Now it seems like you see him all the time, which kind of sucks because once you try to turn someone onto The Tomb, they're like, oh, this guy kind of sounds familiar. But it might be because, he's been copied so many times by people who wanted to keep him under wraps. But then when you find out that Stephen King is the Repairman Jack fan club president, it's difficult to keep it under wraps. But I totally recommend it. I don't want to give too much away, but basically, Repairman Jack is a guy who solves problems. And when it turns out that a mystical element is brought into his contracted lives, it's really really weird, and it's really fun and totally action packed at the same time. So I would say that it's probably one of the best evolutions of this type, and it kind of like ushers in some other things, some other characters and other novels that were to come later. I think that this came out in the 70s, and you know, I ended up talking about it once upon a time at the very beginning of Diabolical Index, and I got really pissed off because it was a thing where it had come out in the 70s and it was re-released, and when he started making sequels to it, which people have been clamoring for, he changed some dates and some important things to it, so I got kind of pissed off. So, in my opinion, if you can find the tomb in its original form, uh, it's a lot better. It might be slightly confusing when the update happens. In Legacies, it was the second book that came out, a decade and some later, maybe more, maybe 2 decades. But one that definitely comes to mind for me, which is ton of fun, and that's definitely when with the action variety of horror, they're always fun. Always. I've never been through one that was real super ponderous or anything. Um, but then again, I mean, I haven't read the Dresden Files, so it's tough to say. But I've seen a lot of people like those, and like the Simon Green. I don't know if it's called Nightscape or what, but it's kind of that. I might be getting those mixed up. Simon Green's got two or more series, and it's that whole detective finding out that his mark or his client has something to do with the occult and the other side, all that type of jazz. It's always so much fun. But when it comes to kind of like mercenaries on the side of good, even in this case, uh, issued by the Catholic Church, Vampires by John Steakley, and you're gonna see that the S in Vampires tells you all you need to know about this crew of guys. Um, it's fantastic. They ended up making a movie about this too, but much like a lot of the movie adaptations, they really reduced some of the daring do and some of the epic heights that these guys got into. But it was such a Vampires was such a down and dirty, no nonsense vampire hunter story. I love it, and so few people have read this one in particular. A lot of his other books are more popular, but like I said, this became a movie. So John Carpenter got interested in it at some point, and it's weird. It's one of those like Jack Reacher things where in the book the guy is like bigger than life. He's like almost 7 feet tall and all this kind of jazz. And for whatever reason, when they decide to put him in the film, he's just a normal sized guy, which I know you can't get away with that a whole lot of times, but I mean, Jason Momoa does exist now, so. Um, the most modern, or I guess the most recent one that I think of, and I guess, I Am Legend is kind of in that camp too, where you have maybe someone who uh, is in this position because they're a survivor of the coming, of the curtain of evil that's like dropped down over the world, and so they're kind of like thrust into it against their will. And I guess you kind of have that with everything, where you have a character who wouldn't have been there if not for circumstances beyond their control, and they end up finding that some skill or occupation or vocation that they had in the normal frame of everything ends up serving them well in this weird afterlife, embroiled in this horrific battle against evil for one reason or another. And you can't really call you can't call the character in I Am Legend. It's difficult to call him proactive. I mean, I guess he's I would say he's reactive, because all these things have happened around him, and he's had to kind of dig his way out of it. Oh God, Mark Reynolds, thrusting into the curtain of evil. Um, oh God, Ben, don't bring up the damn dog. Oh, that was one of the. Oh my God, I was bawling like. And no, okay, forget it. I'm not talking about the dog. That could spoil stuff. But anyhow, um, definitely in that. I can't remember his name. Robert Neville. I think his name is Robert Neville in that book. But fantastic character, and I think that's. I don't know. I think that may have started a few things off. Um, I think that the most recent one that I can think of, and there's been tons of sequels to it, and there was one that was kind of like it, called Bureau 13 by Nick Pallotta. I like Bureau 13 a lot. I found out it was a game that the books came from. But fun times. But the one that's most recent that I had a ball with was Monster Hunter International by Larry Correia. Or I guess it's Correa. It might be Correa. Um, Absolute balls to the wall action. I almost said film again. That's just what it's like when you get into these areas and arenas where you learn more about guns just by reading, and at least in my case, I learned more about guns by reading Monster Hunter International than anything I've ever read before. Um, it is not a Western whatsoever. It is a, I mean, total action horror, which kind of like lends itself to the video game. I would say that video games have kind of been the bastion of action horror. Oh, sorry, Emily. When I throw things out, I think that she's trying to get after it and find out about as much. Okay, I had spoken about this before. I'm thinking about doing a Diabolical Index blog companion, kind of like what I went through in the episodes and stuff to kind of accompany the episode. So if someone is interested in something I spoke about, or need to know where to find it, or don't want to comb through the entire episode or what have you, I think, and actually additional stuff, annotations, different things like that. I think that I'm going to try to make that happen. It'll be a lot of work, but I might just do it. So we'll see what happens. Oh God, Robin singing Sarah McLachlan now. I'm not gonna make it. I'm just not gonna make it. Okay, yeah. So anyway, Monster Hunter International, totally fantastic, bombastic, penoplastic. No, penoplastic. That comes from G.I. Joe, the movie. Not the live action movie, by God, the animated one with Sergeant Slaughter in it. Anyhow. But yeah, it's they have some of the best, funnest creatures known to man. They do it all. In fact, I guess this one might venture into the fantasy. There are a lot of horror elements, but there are also a lot of fantasy elements to the series as well. Like these I think if I remember correctly, they're called the G's, and they end up being these like hood gnomes, and I think they're like weapons dealers or something like that. It's fantastic, but you will not be disappointed if you read Monster Hunter International, Vendetta, Alpha. I think there are like eight sequels now, but there are actually patches, military patches for Monster Hunter groups from every state, as far as I know. Fantastic. It's totally awesome. So yeah, there was one that I read, and I don't want to go through too many of these, but I think the final one I was thinking of was one called Red Law by Lovegrove. He's a British horror author, and I think that he's gotten a lot of interest in some of his more sci-fi based horror out of Great Britain. But Red Law, I think, is a good place to stop because with that, you have that one too. If you want to bring it over, it's definitely this old grizzled Clint Eastwood type. Except, like I said, it's a British hero, and it's just a cop that hates vampires, and the vampires come in all shapes and sizes and creeds and colors and I guess you'd say affiliations in this book as well. It's definitely not something where you get the run of the mill in any of the characters, the cops or the I guess the vampire immigration people, and some of the ones that are underground, some of the ones that are more in the public eye. It's great, and there's a sequel as well. And the strange part, and I guess it's kind of ironic, but it takes place. They come over to America in the second one, and for whatever reason, it didn't have the same flavor for me. But I definitely recommend Red Law by Lovegrove. It's a lot of fun. So it's just a question of will this is TV and movies, are they the reason why this has kind of come back into flavor again? I think a lot of times when it comes to action horror stuff, I think that it can be underestimated. I think that a lot of people see it as fluff, like when you're going through the checkout line when they have the impulse buys, and you'll see some sort of a Psy-Cops novel or whatever like that, and you'll see that there's some kind of cop with a link to the occult, and I think it's kind of the I guess you could say it's almost a little bit of the fallout from the supernatural romance craze, because it seems like they always had a vein of action. I know you like that, Mark. Running through their stuff too. So maybe it's a byproduct of that, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Supernatural, all that kinds of things. It's difficult to get away from the action horror genre when it comes to that medium, definitely, because it's just fun. I mean, especially since the action hero kind of transcends the genre as it is, especially when you think of like Ash Williams and all that kind of jazz. But I think that was totally unexpected that would have happened the way it did. But that doesn't mean you can discount him. He's probably one of the best in the business, if I had to guess, especially when it comes like the old ones and Lovecraftian stuff. But let's see here. Let's see what people are saying here. What We Do in the Shadows, I still haven't checked that out yet. I'm such a moron. I've had that movie in my possession for like a year now. And now the show's out and I haven't checked out any of it. But I'm always late to the party. Always. Always late to the party. Good God. I think everybody's drunk already. They're talking about like weird impulse buys in the store. But yeah, so I guess when it comes down to it, I'm a big fan of the 70s horror genre when it comes to, I mean, there were so many paperbacks that I found along the way. Graham Masterson, and I was thinking of the one called The Djinn, and the ending of that book is, I was gobsmacked, and I think that was more along the lines of defense, not necessarily attack, where you have a guy getting embroiled in some sort of family, mystical family vendetta or something like that, and he ends up having to protect people and all that kinds of stuff. So I guess that's kind of on the outskirts of this, but good God, the end of that, it had one of the one of the most gruesomely shocking endings that of any. It's one of those books where you open it, you read it, and you're just like, oh man, like you don't even know what to do. You're just kind of like stuck there, just rereading the same page over and over again because you just cannot believe what just happened. Graham Masterson, the Jinn, whether or not, um, whether or not I can't even remember how good the rest of the book was, but I got through it. I'm not a gigantic one for slogging through books that I don't like because there are just so many. The stack is so massively huge that if I waited around for stuff to interest me, uh, I would never get anything done. But hey, now you know. Oh, I almost. Oh no, I can't say it. Okay, I'll say it. While we're on the subject of Tim Wagner, um, guys, I can't help it. I started reading. I started reading the prologue, "In the Grip of the Dark," and for whatever reason, it's gonna take a lot for me to pick that book back up again. Um, I talked to Emily about this not too long ago. For whatever reason, I'm not a gigantic fan of an author telling you what just happened and then telling you what you should feel about what just happened. Um, and you know, maybe maybe it's something that kind of fades away. But for whatever reason, what do I call it? Oh, the Mouth of the Dark. Sorry, pardon me, the Mouth of the Dark, or the Dark of the Mouth, or whatever it was. I don't know. I can't remember now. But whatever it was, that prologue just did not do it for me. So I guess there's a pretty awesome group of humans that are still moving through it and enjoying it. So I might just keep going. But I mean, at some point, if the prologue doesn't grab you, what's the prologue there for? Is it supposed to be giving you information that you could have gotten throughout the rest of the body of the story? Is it providing you with information that'll come up later? I don't even know. But I know, Ben Senior. It's just I don't know. It's a question of, yeah, it's only 200 pages, but okay, okay. I've maybe I didn't quite mean to cause such a stir about this with my audience here tonight. The Black Books crew are in full effect tonight, and they are currently reading a Tim Wagner book for the next book club. So I'm not trying to insult the guy. I'm sure he's fantastic. In fact, I got a couple of his books at home that I haven't even started reading yet. But that prologue, for whatever reason, it really threw me off. So I suppose that I should give it another chance. If so many of you are singing its praises, I probably need to get through the damn prologue, or maybe I should just skip the prologue. Maybe I'll skip the prologue, go straight into the heart of the book, and see what happens from there. I have been wrong before. And hey, I think that he can. I think that he, if he is as widespread as I think he is, I think that he ought to know his criticisms by now. And I'm not saying that the book is a total loss. All I'm saying is that for whatever reason, and I know what the reasons are, and I kind of explained them, sort of, but it just felt like in a lot of ways it was this strange. It was a strange thing where it was telling me, it told me everything. Like it didn't leave any sort of relatability in question there, where you might get something from a page of a prologue, or a narrative or a character study or whatever, it may get you in somewhere that the author hasn't experienced. So why that just seems to, put a limit on it immediately. Whereas you could kind of infer stuff yourself, and it might be more appealing to you and more resonant with you. In this case, it seemed like there were at least a couple of instances where it told you exactly what was happening, and it told you exactly what you're supposed to get from that. Which maybe that's required. Maybe some people appreciate it. Whatever it is, it struck me wrong. Um, so I'll give it another shot. Maybe I don't want to I don't want to rain on the parade if I haven't even seen who the flag corps. I don't know. That analogy fell off. Majorettes. I don't want to rain on the parade until I see what the majorettes look like. That's better, I guess. I don't know. Something. Who knows? But anyways, hopefully it's been really super tangential. But basically, I I think that the action horror genre is totally never going away. It's so much fun, and it kind of leads you. I think that action can be used as a definite. I don't want to say distraction, but maybe misdirection, where you can be kind of engrossed in the action part of it, and then when you realize that you're in the middle of a horrific situation when it comes to horror as a visceral thing beyond the human or whatever like that. I think that when it comes to the horror, the action in horror, I think that it can lead you into thinking that everything is going to end up fine. Someone may end up dead, but their soul isn't going to be changed, or their human form isn't going to be mutated by whatever the enemy is, and all that fantastic stuff that can happen within the confines of a horror story. And so much fun, especially when someone comes out changed. So it's awesome, especially if you can find an action hero in these that isn't so invincible. I think that's kind of where somebody mentioned Blade earlier, and I think that's where Blade falls short. When you have a character that is really hard to kill, really hard to best, all the original weaknesses that existed are taken away or written away or just kind of made convenienced, all that type of stuff. And then when you get rid of a lot of that stuff, sometimes it rings a little bit hollow. But a lot of people think action is hollow to begin with. So yeah, give me your thoughts on that. If I've forgotten any, let me know on those things. I'm sure that I've forgotten a lot of them, but hopefully within the horror novel community, I haven't. I mean, one that I could have brought up was The Wolf's Hour by Robert McCammon. I bring up McCammon a lot, but The Wolf's Hour comes to mind. I mean, werewolf in Nazi Germany. Can't beat that with a stick. I'm actually, it is terrifying that they haven't made that into a movie yet. But anyway, check it out yourself. I mean, go out and try these books. Maybe I will attempt. I have a lot of these. I sent all those covers to him, so I might try to do kind of like a fledgling companion to this episode. It depends. I don't know. It was a rough day.
I ordered 4 more Goosebumps books.
Oh, well, you guys going to be happy to hear that. Andrew, just the Choose Your Own Adventures? Wow. Did you find the peanut butter one? Oh!
And an internet one.
Oh, man.
And a talking toy one.
Fantastic.
And the
Oh,
first
don't give them all away. Don't give them all away.
and the first one.
Okay, so this just in, Andrew Moore, the fantastic, inimitable Andrew Moore, has just notified me that he has ordered 4 more Goosebumps Choose Your Own Adventure books. So I'm telling you, this is becoming a thing. Yeah, the Andrew Moore fan club just arrived. Emily is the president. So there you go. Actually, Mark from Pointless Discussions was asking me if the peanut butter one was next. I was like, no, we haven't got that one, but we might now. So we'll see what happens with that. Anyway, definitely, if you like Choose Your Own Adventure, speaking of that, definitely come out June 26th. It's a Wednesday at 8 p.m. Go to the Kettletop Brew House in Anderson, Indiana, to check out Choose Your Own Adventure, an improvised story where I think we're going to start out with some sort of framework. I think I might be in charge of that. God help me. And then as it goes along, I think that we're going to have people make choices, and then they're going to improvise their next moves as it goes along. So this is going to be memorable for sure. Memorable in a good way? Hard to say. I don't know. Maybe we won't even. Maybe it'll be memorable on video, and we won't remember a thing. Hard to say. Takes place in a bar. I usually get drunk on my own imagination, but I might need a little bit of liquid courage that night. We'll see. I don't know. I might end up being the Rod Serling of the whole thing. We'll see what happens. But, yep, like I said, June 26th, 8 p.m., Kettletop Brew House in Anderson, Indiana. Make sure to make it out if you can. I don't know if Natalie's still here or not. Natalie's sinister sweetheart. She said that she's going. That would mean going from Florida to Anderson, Indiana. That would really be something if she ended up doing that. So that would be wild. And yeah, I mean, everyone is welcome. I would love to see you all there. And like I said before, you normally get to hear us making fools of ourselves. In this case, you get to actually see us make fools of ourselves. But then again, I guess you guys see me make a fool of myself almost every Monday. But I've been trying to keep it going. I have slacked in the past. I have had hiatuses. I think that's the plural for that. Hiatuses. But I've been trying to keep it going as much as possible. And do not forget, I don't know if you have an image for this either, but Saturday, special edition. We are bringing in Betty Rocksteady from Perpetual Motion Printing or Publishing. Perpetual Motion Publishing Machine. What am I saying? Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing. With The Writhing Sky, this is horror winner, novella of the year from last year, and all kinds of stuff in the works. Her new collection is called In Dreams We Rot. So definitely show up Saturday at 8 p.m. Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. She's from Nova Scotia, so we had to finagle that just slightly. It'll be much earlier than normal, and it'll be on a Saturday. We'll see how it works out. But I've been talking to her a lot. She's very, very super cool. She likes a lot of Betty Boop stuff and kind of like the Bosco old school Cuphead type of art. Yeah, dude, it's awesome. And I think that she has a lot of that aesthetic going on in her own drawings. I think she did the cover for 2 of them, like Jagged Teeth and The Writhing Sky. I think she did the illustrations for both of those things. So yeah, check out Diabolical Index Special Interview Edition this Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then right back in for the non-entry Choose Your Own Adventure that Monday. So it's going to be a pretty decently stocked week ahead. So As always, thanks for showing up tonight. Beware your human heart. For this is the Diabolical Index, where the pages of the uncanny reside, for June 3rd, 2019. I remembered it this time. I am up on my game. And speaking of being up on your game, thanks for the Black Books crew. As always, hopefully nobody's going to get arrested. Don't operate any moving vehicles or heavy machinery. Thanks to Mark Reynolds for stopping by. And Mel, as always. Natalie was here. Mr. Gully. I know I'm forgetting somebody. Josh DeForge. Check out Josh DeForge's new short, He Is No Man, at Running Scared Motion Pictures. And as always, in case I forgot to mention it, stay squirrely.